Alvaro Casado, Chief Revenue Officer, Middle East, PV Hardware. The topic is going to be mitigating risks on large-scale solar farms.
Good morning, everyone. So today we're going to talk about wind protection and why is this an important topic? We're seeing globally a trend on which we're seeing more weather events are more recurrent, they're more severe, and they're happening everywhere. And this has a huge impact on the PV plants. Because you have a big surface, you have tracking systems that heavily react to these wind events, and we need to make sure that we protect the tracking systems. On the other hand, we have a trend that it's increasing the size of the tracking systems. We have bigger trackers, we have bigger modules, and on the other hand, we have weaker modules, because the bigger the module, you need to contain the weight, so the frames are getting thinner, the glasses are also getting thinner. So how can we combine these two effects? The weather events that are happening globally that are more recurrent, and on the other hand, we're having weaker PV modules and the requirement of more precise structures. So there's three main moments in the PV plant life that we need to protect against weather events, which is during construction, because during construction, your trackers cannot react. You're having a fixed structure that it's static, and during that, the life or the execution of the PV project, you can have wind events. And the projects are getting bigger. We started having scales of 50 megawatts, 10 megawatts, and now we're in the giga scale. So the plants are during construction for a longer period of time. They cannot react to these weather events, but still, you have this impact of the wind. And during operation, we have two other types of wind events. One is changing of wind direction. This doesn't necessarily mean that it's coming from one side and suddenly it's coming from the other side. It's basically, we have events like downburst, which is a wind that is coming from the top and then is spreading throughout the site. So it doesn't have an even direction. And then we also have wind that might be coming from the north or south of the plant that might slightly shift and might not give enough time for the tracking system to react. And lastly, we have a rapid increase of wind speed. So tracking systems need time to react and then go to a safe position and make sure that it withstands these wind events. But lately, we're seeing that this quick increase in wind speed is happening more often, and trackers don't have enough time to react. So during the presentation, we'll see what's the market standard to cover against these events, and what do we suggest as PVH. This is information that we're getting from the World WMEO and from G-Cube Insurance to reflect that there's an increase in weather events. During the past 50 years, we've seen an increase of 5 times the number of weather events. It can be because we're present in more regions, or just because there's really an increase on these weather events. On the insurance side, we're seeing that there's an increase in the past 5 years of 35% on the number of claims. So we have more weather events, we have more claims, but what is more important is that 50% of those claims are weather-related claims and account for 80% of the total value of the claims. So protecting against weather events is more important and more critical for the PV plants. And this is important to understand that it's not a regional effect. It doesn't happen on a specific region. We've seen weather events happening in the US, in Mexico, in Australia, in India, in Middle East, so all around the globe. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have a really high speed or cyclones or big weather events. Just a normal event with picking up wind speed quickly can be enough to damage the PV plant. So there's no zero risk location. All the PV plants need to have a proper assessment against weather events. And we're seeing this increase globally, and as we were saying, this represents 80% of the value of the claims. So let's understand how, first, the tracking systems react. The basic methodology to react against wind events is the stow strategy. And we have 3 main wind speeds. We have the trigger wind speed, which is usually on a 1P tracker is 15 or 16 meters per second, which is the wind speed at which the tracker will start to move to a protective or a defense position. We have the second wind speed, which is the stow wind speed, which is the maximum wind speed at which the tracker can be at any given position. It can be oriented to any side. If the wind speed exceeds this wind, then the tracker needs to be in a protective position, in stow position. And then you have the maximum design wind speed of the project, which is adjusted project to project, and it's the maximum wind speed that the tracker can withstand in stow position. It's important to see the graph that we have on the right. Number 4, that's the time that the tracker has to go to stow. The gap between the trigger and the maximum stow wind speed. And that duration, that time, it's getting shorter. And we're seeing wind events on which it's shorter than 5 minutes. And the market industry now, it's telling us that the trackers take more, or on average, 5 minutes to go to stow, which is not sufficient in most of the cases. So let's see what are the strategies to protect against these three events that we were talking at the beginning. During construction, so the standard on the industry is that during construction, tracking systems have a directional stow strategy. So they need to be facing the wind. But because they cannot react, they need to be stuck in one position. And they cannot be directly in the stow position, because if the wind comes from the other side, it's a risk of failing. So the trackers need to adopt an intermediate position. So it's not protected to the maximum. It's just giving slightly more protection than the operational wind speed, but not to the full wind speed of the site. Then what we have in PVH and what we propose is a non-directional stowing strategy. So basically, the moment that you complete the PV plant, or the moment that you put the first module on a tracking system, you leave the tracker at the stow position and will be protected to the maximum wind speed. And this is especially important now that we're seeing these massive scale plants, 3 gigawatts that take more than a year to commission. These plants will be safe throughout the construction of the PV plant. Then we have the changing of the wind direction. As we were saying at the beginning, the trackers on the industry, the standard on the tracker industry is have directional stowing, which means the tracker will take maximum 5 minutes to reach this safe position. And there's a risk if the tracker is facing this direction and the wind is coming from the other direction, the tracker will need to rotate all the way to reach the safe position facing the wind. And there's a few risks. First risk is that tracker might not have enough force to counter that wind and might get stuck, and it's at high risk of failing. The second thing is that we'll start rotating and we'll need to go through really unstable positions, such as 0 degrees. So, and lastly, it takes more than 5 minutes. So it takes a long time, it's trying to go against the wind direction, so it might not be able to overcome that wind pressure, and it goes through more unstable positions. What we have, on the other hand, in PVH is that our tracking system takes less than 2.5 minutes to go to safe position. And it's non-directional, so it doesn't need to face the wind. So as soon as there's a wind event, if the wind is coming from this direction, the tracker will just stay and will block itself and will be safe in less than 2.5 minutes. And contrary to what happens on the market industry, it always moves to a safer position. So if the tracker is at 0 degrees, which would be the worst position, it will start moving towards the safe position, and every single movement will be taken to a safer position. So it reduces the risk. It also takes a lot less time to go to stow, and it's protecting the tracking system a lot better than the classic stowing strategy. Lastly, we have the protection against the wind ramp. As we were saying at the beginning, that's an example that we have of stowing. On the left side, we see that if it takes that amount of time, there would be a period of time on which the tracker won't be safe. Also, it can get stuck. Again, we were saying that the tracker needs to rotate. So if the wind is coming from the opposite direction, it won't be able to overcome that wind and will stay stuck at that position and might fail. On the other hand, we have our tracking system, our solution, that it's non-directional, takes less than 2.5 minutes, and again, works with the wind to go to stow. If the wind is coming from this direction, the tracker will just leave itself and then fall to a position of safety. So it will always be able to go to stow and doesn't need to put extra force to go to that defense position. And lastly, there's advanced methodologies that are not related to the stowing strategy that can even help prevent further the effects of the wind events. On the market standard, we have the wind sensors that are scattered around the site. Those are the red dots on the left. Those wind sensors have a limited range of detection. So if the wind is coming from one gap, or it's coming from one sensor that doesn't properly communicate, you have the risk of having failures at the plant. On the other hand, our solution not only is based on the weather sensors, but we also have access to external weather alarms, which can give us a heads up a long time in advance. We also have LiDAR sensors that are able to detect the wind speed and wind direction as far as 10 kilometers away. We also have artificial intelligence systems, which can take the information throughout the whole year, then understand the wind patterns, and then react accordingly throughout the life of the PV plant. And then lastly, we can have ground data, because these wind sensors are 4-meter high, but then on surface level, we have torque sensors on the tracking systems that can precisely detect what's the pressure that the tracking system is receiving. So what's the future of the solar industry, and how can we make sure that it's resilient against weather events? Firstly, we will need to continue innovating. There's always ways to improve, and the market keeps evolving. Every 6 months or every month, we have new innovations. We need to make sure that whenever we're developing a project, we don't only gather the information on that specific project, but we gather the surroundings of the project to really understand what's the wind pattern. We need to have a global cooperation. Understanding the wind events and the wind patterns in other regions can give us an idea of how the wind patterns can behave in other regions. And lastly, we need to have support, policy support. This goes all the way from IPPs to EPCs and everyone to make sure that on the requirements or the technical specifications, there's something addressing these wind events, like asking for a specific time to stow or asking for specific strategies to mitigate the wind risk. And as a summary, these are the advantages that we have, and that's totally going to mitigate the wind events that we're seeing globally. First, during construction, because we have non-directional stowing strategy, so as soon as you have one tracker with modules, you can leave it in one position and will be safe throughout the whole duration of the construction. We protect against wind direction or wind changes of wind direction, even on downburst, because the tracking system doesn't need to be facing the wind. And then it's protected against the maximum wind ramp, because it goes to stow in less than 2.5 minutes. And lastly, if we want to add another layer of protection to the tracking system, we have the advanced prediction algorithm and the additional features to predict the wind events and patterns that are happening outside of the PV plant. That's it. I don't know if there's any questions from the audience. I think we have time still.
You talked about industry standard having a wind directional stow strategy, right? What is preventing these companies which use wind stow strategy into the direction of the wind from adopting what PV hardware has?
I mean, I think that really it depends on the time they take to analyze. I mean, it's something that any company can adopt, but the reality is that it takes a lot of effort to do that engineering. It's not one thing that you reach in a few months. It takes years of development, working with the module vendors, and then also validating your structure with third parties to make sure that you reach this level of protection and to reach to this new milestone of having non-directional stowing. Other tracker vendors can also reach, or the industry can reach this level of non-directional stowing. But again, it will take time. It's a really costly implementation on development, but it can be done. So it's a matter of making sure that everybody understands the risk and they take this approach that we're doing.